Hey everybody, Adam here. In today's video, I wanted to dive deeper into a prompting technique I'm calling conceptual prompting. It's a way of guiding the language model by referencing a rich metaphorical concept rather than just listing out kind of like the raw instructions. And I've found it to be another powerful tool to have in my toolkit as I'm writing up these prompts and agents for getting more out of AI. And I think it's something that everybody working with LLMs should think about, both because you might use it in your own prompts, and also it's an interesting way to reflect on how the LLM itself is working and thinking per se. So to understand why conceptual prompting works, we do need to kind of go under the hood of the LLM. A great example of this is some research from the Anthropic company, which makes the Claude LLM. And this paper that they released in May of 2024 talks about a component that they found within their model that represents the Golden Gate Bridge. And no matter what language you used or kind of exactly how you reference it, this is the component that lit up in the model for the Golden Gate Bridge. This concept acted like a focal point in the model's associative memory. And one interesting thing about this was Anthropic released a version of the Claude chatbot with the Golden Gate Bridge turned up to 11. And that led to some really interesting weirdness. So it would link the Golden Gate Bridge to completely unrelated prompts like, how do I make a spaghetti dinner? But it also produced some, pretty negative results in the model as well. For example, it would claim that the Rwandan genocide had occurred in San Francisco. And they produced this really interesting model here, where you can kind of see a lot of different concepts that they located within their model and how they were linked together within sort of broader conceptual groupings, difficult situations, catch 22, conflicting allegiances and identities, things like this. So you can see it gets pretty abstract. And I do really want to stress that no one really understands how this works under the hood, which means that when it gets to the actual weights within the transformers, like people can technically explain to you how the model was created, but they don't actually see the calculation kind of within the transformer unless they're doing, some research to really take a look at it. And I just want to use that to make sure that you understand it. Keep an open mind because no one is for sure confident on how the AI is picking out what that next token should be. So I think being experimental provides a lot of value as you're looking at building prompts. But to bring this back to a more practical reason as to why to do this is the technical limitations that you have when you're building an agent. This is the new agent that I built. It's basically been stripped down to only have some of this conceptual prompting and a single piece of regular instructions. And so in my initial run of this agent, I was using about 1,600 characters out of this 8,000 character window. And now you can see I've gotten it down to 538. And I really do believe I could probably even shrink this down further. And the reason that this matters is because, while this is a simple agent that's only interacting with a single document, this space becomes very precious as you're trying to instruct these agents in more complex business processes. For example, every piece of knowledge that you're pulling in from SharePoint is going to need to have associated instructions on how and when the agent should use that document. You can't just like dump a bunch of files in here and expect it to, know when to access them. So it's in those kinds of settings where I think the economy of language that you can really get with these conceptual prompting methods can start to be really important. And, to tie this back to Golden Gate Claude, it's because this conceptual prompt conveys a wealth of implied behaviors and traits that are far more verbose than we could spell out explicitly. And one other way to talk about that is that these concepts are mapped with something called a word vector within the LLM. And so there's actually like a number that is to the AI its distance between two concepts. And so in some prior machine learning research, for example, if you put like a country's name and the word vector distance to its capital would be roughly the same distance. regardless of which country you were looking at. And that was interesting for that particular project because they hadn't really instructed it on what the concept of a capital was, but it sort of had figured out that that concept existed by that similar word vector definition. And I know that gets a little technical, but it's basically just saying that Orpheus, because he's a famous character with stories about him, stories about the stories about him, discussion about the stories, and his use in other material that's all within the LLM, so that his word vector map is going to be a lot deeper and more complicated than just telling it to do something. And so that's one of the really important concepts that underlies conceptual prompting, is that we are trying to kind of manipulate the AI into using a richer concept web and a richer word vector network. And now I want to zoom out just a little bit and talk about prompting more generally, because I think how this fits into a bigger prompting framework is going to be really important. And as I said earlier in the video, I really do think that there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of skin this cat. There's not one exactly right way to prompt, and you should experiment with the communication style that's working for you. That being said, I do think there are some kind of rules of thumb you can follow. A lot of them are covered here in this Microsoft prompt guidance that we have, this goal, context, source, expectations framework. And basically what this is doing is it's kind of taking some of the principles from how you build a good computer program and sort of simplifying them and applying them to text. So you can see here, what is the response you want? Why do you need it? What are the sources? And how should they be accessed? And the expectations is actually going to be everything from like the tone and the level of detail to security and safety restrictions as well. So I think that this framework is actually a really powerful way to look at things more generally. And I want you to think of conceptual prompting and how it fits into this. So Orpheus has context. There's expectations about how Orpheus responds and what his behavior is. And it's not really a source, because these are more kind of like that document that I had in the agent, like the actual material it's pulling information from, instead of like that conceptual map. But you can just see that it really fits into this framework a lot more powerfully than just prepare me for an introductory meeting. And again, I think this conceptual prompting fits mostly with like agents when you're building a reusable use case, instead of just kind of like a prompt that you're doing here and there. Some other conceptual prompts that I've had success with are using Janus, who's a two-faced god, and that's if you're trying to have an internal and an external discussion and sort of keep them separate. That's helped keep that pretty clear for it. I've also used Proteus and Tiresias, who are two Greek characters as well. Proteus is really interesting. He's a shapeshifter, and so if you're trying to fit in kind of multiple perspectives, that name really helps the AI understand how to do that. And just one thing I'd say is, like, you don't really need to be an expert in Greek classics and mythology to use this method. I thought about Orpheus myself, but another one that worked for me was Antigone, and I found her by just going to the LLM and asking it about characters that sort of fit the concepts that I was trying to match, and then through there I was able to get Antigone. It gave me Amelia Bedelia first, but she's someone who takes everything literally, and I don't really want to give that instruction to an AI. I really worry about that. And so, you can kind of dig in a little bit and find some things that are going to work with. You also aren't limited to Greek characters. You could use Scheherazade, you could use Erlang Shen or Sun Wukong. You could use whoever you want, kind of however they're fitting into this system. I will give a caveat: the AIs that we use are heavily trained on English sources, so they're going to really favor stuff that's in kind of like the Western canon, but they are going to have a lot of material as well. So, and another kind of tip I'd give here is that you really want to focus on, and I think this is why these older characters are a good fit, characters that have more of like a moral background, and that have kind of like a simple thing, like, Orpheus, Narcissus, like they have simple stories with simple morals behind them. That's going to help them, be an effective anchor for your prompt.